Hello, everybody, and welcome into Know Thy Enemy Week 2 edition. Bengals are coming fresh off a Week 1 victory against the Cleveland Browns, and we are back for Week 2 to take a look at this new Jaguars squad. And it's actually pretty interesting. The first edition of Know Thy Enemy was the Jaguars game with Jake Browning on the road. So, fun little circle back to that. So looking ahead at this game and how this team has changed since those days, you still have some mainstays like Josh Hines-Allen, who had another incredible week one, is absolutely one of the best unknown defensive ends. Unknown is just underappreciated is a better term for that. He just is consistently one of the best pass rushing DNs who just doesn't really get mentioned in that conversation with the TJ Watts and the Myles Garretts and the Max Crosbys, but he absolutely deserves that attention. Was wrecking the Carolina Panthers week one to the tune of 7 pressures. Absolutely expect him to be a problem. Also, looking at the other parts of the D line, in case the Bengals are still dealing with that injury to Lucas Patrick, they apparently had Amarius Mims maybe have a little get a little dinged up, a little nicked up. So we'll have to kind of monitor that situation. But across from him, you have Trayvon Walker, who was a high draft pick, who's really started to come along as more than just a run defender, much like Shamar Stewart for Bengals fans. That's kind of the trajectory you're hoping for, that Rashawn Gary trajectory where they use their athleticism to win and slowly start to put together that pass rush profile. Trayvon Walker has taken those steps seemingly last year. We'll see if he continues to do it this season throughout. Eric Armstead, just a big hulking dude who's not even the nose tackle down there, who's going to be filling up gaps, eating blocks, just causing absolute problems down there next to Devon Hamilton, who will be the actual nose tackle, eating a lot of those double teams, controlling the point of attack in the line of scrimmage there. The defensive line is very formidable, but one of my favorite other underrated players is 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪. I believe that's how you say his name. I apologize if I butchered it. I've been following him since he was with the Falcons, and man, he was such a great pickup for the Jags. And I remember them getting kind of cooked for his contract at the start, and people thinking he overpaid. Based on what he's given the Jaguars, they did not overpay. The guy has been incredible. And he was an absolute game changer for them versus Carolina last week. Divisional game, obviously, or not divisional game, expansion team rivalry game is more like it. And the Jags defense was absolutely lights out, led by Foye, forced defensive stops, an interception, and a forced fumble. Absolutely incredible performance by him. Really awesome. Obviously, when you look at the secondary, the big name that everyone talks about is Travis Hunter, but I believe he only got like 6 snaps on defense in week one. So we'll wait for maybe a little bit more of a contribution there before we look too hard at that. But still did a great job of getting those manufactured touches, being that slot receiver, playing that complement to what Brian Thomas gives you as a deep option, what Dyami Brown gives you as a run blocker and also a vertical threat too. I really, really like what they have there. The secondary is obviously Tyson Campbell, as many know, but Michigan product Jordan Lewis is there as well. And both of them had really good games last week against these Carolina receivers. Now, a lot of this context will go with the fact that Carolina is maybe not the most competitive team this season, and that some of this can be taken with a grain of salt. But I think it's completely fair to look at the Bengals game in week one and say they were rusty and that wasn't their true potential either. In the same way that they would believe that, I would say the same of the Jaguars. They did not play a perfect game. Trevor Lawrence still had some of the accuracy issues trying to connect with Brian Thomas and downfield and some of the more intermediate routes. That's very much to be expected. So very excited for this Jaguars team as they move forward. Think they're really about to kind of hit their stride that they've been slowly creeping toward these last few years. They really invested a lot on the offense, much like the Bengals did in the offensive line. We know they put draft capital into a guy like Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, and then they've got Anton Harrison and Patrick McCarry, the former Baltimore guard as well. They really solidified this offensive line. And again, caveat of Carolina there, but just giving credit where credit's due, that Jacksonville had the lowest pressure rate allowed and the tied lowest sack rate allowed for week one. So props to the offensive line for that. In their run game with Travis Etienne. I know there were trade rumors swirling around him and Tank Bixby, and they added 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗡𝗏. What was going to happen with that room? Well, Tank Bixby on his way to the Philadelphia Eagles. Etienne had an amazing week one. Maybe didn't look as spry as he used to, but just one of those really dependable backs. I'm not going to invoke the Carlos Hyde comparisons of like just one of those guys who's not the best back, but one of those guys when you give him the ball, he's going to do something well. I've always been a fan of Etienne. I'm happy to see him be successful after he's been much maligned these last couple years. I do want to point out that as sometimes when you're especially looking at 1 week samples, averages can be difficult to put a lot of stock in, right? Depending on what you're looking at, you may have one run that comes with 70 yards after contact, and suddenly you're averaging 30, 40 yards after contact on a couple carries, right? I see a little bit of that when you look at the offensive line. I know they were great in yards before contact in this instance, and it's caused a lot of celebration for Jaguars fans because they've been kind of putrid at that. And I can only imagine how I, as a Bengals fan, would feel elated if suddenly they were much better in short yardage situations. I would be ecstatic. But I do have a little bit of hesitation when I look at the adjusted yards before contact, which came to just 1.18, which ranked 31st. So a giant difference between the adjusted and the actual quote unquote yards before contact per attempt. Again, not something I'm going to put in a lot of stock either way, both positive or negative, but just something I want to see where does that number land when everything kind of merges together after a larger sample. I think that's going to determine a lot of how successful the Jaguars can be, how successful Cohen can be as a coach and as the coordinator now for them. Looked really good with some interesting designs and a game plan versus Carolina. Obviously, having a successful run game is going to allow him to open things up in the passing game more and more. Some creative looks for getting Brian Thomas, for example, the rushing touchdown. That is the kind of stuff that he's going to be able to do more easily with a efficient run game. Doesn't have to be top 3, top 5 in yards before contact. But if you guys end up in 15 to 20 with that revamped offensive line, with the talent you have back there in 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗡𝗏 and Etienne, that's definitely going to make for a threatening enough backfield that you are going to be able to effectively rely on that run game. And that's really the goal, right? With that look at the offense, with that look at the defense, let's talk about what the Bengals' strategy and plan of attack should be on both offense and defense when taking on this loaded Jaguars roster that has a lot of talent and is really just starting to hit their stride. The Bengals offense absolutely has to find consistency. They came out strong last week with their opening script. Their first 2-3 drives looked good. It stalled immediately, and it stalled in a bad way to the tune of, I believe, 7 total yards, and I believe it was just 2 net yards for that game in the second half. That can't happen. You cannot have that. This is not the Browns offense. This is a much more talented roster. You are going to have to find ways to keep up with that. You have to be able to continue to rely on the run game and Chase Brown. He forced 5 missed tackles. He was tied for first in forced missed tackles on week 1. Be confident in relying on him, not just in the first half, rely on him in the second half. And that doesn't mean just take the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands, take the ball away from T. Higgins and Mike Gesicki and Noah Fant and Ja'Marr Chase and all of these talented receivers you have. No, just don't abandon the run until you need it in very obvious situations, because you're not setting yourself up for success that way. Find some creative ways to create space for your receivers, whether that's lining Ja'Marr Chase up in the slot, whether that's using bunch formations, whether that's using little pick and rub routes to just try and create a little bit more space. Try and just make it a little bit easier on your guys as they're getting into the rhythm of the season, right? Like, everybody's a little rusty. Everybody could use a little bit of a boost, right? And that's an easy way that you can get that offense going, get that confidence, and get those guys going on their own. For the defense, keep everything in front of you. Just like you did when you were facing off against the Browns. You didn't get too high. You didn't get too low. I believe you were 15th in EPA. per play. Again, week 1 sample against a Browns team, just like I would for the Carolina Panthers against the Jaguars. I'm not going to put too much stock into the defensive numbers for the Bengals going against the Browns, right? But it is worth noting that they were much better against the run. They were a middle of the pack defense in terms of expected points added, even if they did allow Joe Flacco to be a little bit more effective out of structure than he really ever should be. That defense just needs to try and keep it from getting beat over the top, try and keep it from giving those big plays. Bend, don't break, as cliche as it is. That's how the Bengals have to play until they can either force that tackle for loss, force that sack, or force that interception that's going to be able to get the turnover on the downs so that the Bengals offense can try and push them out in front of this Jaguars offense, because that's the only way that I see the Bengals walking out with a victory this weekend against the Jaguars. As always, thank you guys for tuning in to Know Thy Enemy, brought to you by the Right Way Sports Network. Please do not forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and tune in next week for State of the Jungle on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and find Know Thy Enemy here on the Sit Down with Malik Wright YouTube channel, as well as on X and Twitter. Thank you guys. See you next week. 𝗙𝗣𝗅𝗛𝗡.
This is TWSN. You ain't heard about us yet, well you better know now, because it's the place that it all goes down.